So this week's episode, we have a guest. He is coming from the UK. He's a writer. He's written on many things. I've noticed he does a lot of writing for Fangoria,
Right.
but he's also did writing for Little White Lies, The Digital Fix, Animation Magazine, and he's also, of course, a contributor to a lot of our favorite physical media outlets, whether it be Eureka, Arrow Video, 101 Films, Second Sight Films, and there's a whole lot more to get into. And this week's guest is Rich Johnson. How you doing, man?
I'm good. I'm just getting over a cold.
Oh,
and I've had no sleep anyway, so I appreciate you getting up early. So I'll probably feel as tired as you two.
With my job, I get up at 4:30 every morning. So this is honestly not. I mean, it is my weekend.
Well, that's just ridiculous. That's a ridiculous time to get up at.
That's dawn. That's the pre-dawn hours. Just as the world wakes up.
Nobody cares about how much sleep we get. They just want things to get done.
That's true. That's very true.
But it's fine. It's fine. But we're just glad to have you here to talk to. So Rich, just please tell how are things going in general? Other than having a cold.
Yeah, all good. What can I say? It's it's been a good, real solid 3 years, I would say, of sort of getting back into film journalism. Really, I had a little bit of a sort of a stab at it in the early noughties, when I was just starting off as a graphic designer. I kind of just came home and had my little outlet of doing reviews. So I used to write for a few British film magazines. There was one that was really well respected. It was quite short lived. It was called Hot Dog Magazine. So there's probably a few people out there will remember it. So yeah, I used to sort of focus on the magazines that I used to read myself anyway, and those are the ones that I used to contact, and anything that had a distinctive voice. Hot Dog was very it kind of went against magazines like Empire, which are a brown nose a lot. I think Empire, they're a bit more of a commercial mag, and they kind of you can see they almost feel like they're sort of sleeping with the filmmakers, and they want to they're very eager to please. And I think Empire magazine in particular, it's had a lot of different editors that's changed. It's gone in and out of being a good magazine and then back to kind of sort of falling into the more sort of commercial territories. But I think it's always been like that. Hot Dog was just brilliant. It had little diagrams in there, and it was just fun, and it was humorous. And I still miss writing for that. And I think that's what kind of then reminded me to think, I had so long, being a freelance graphic designer and illustrator, and then I went into education. So that's my main full-time job, is being a lecturer. So I'm a lecturer in graphic design. I work across all the media now. So film, television. I work in the film and TV studios for students, and film theory. So I like to sort of wear many caps.
Yeah, I was gonna say, dude. I mean, I read that you did all this stuff, and we were definitely gonna get into. I want to start it. We always like to start at our beginnings, and lead up through how you got into all this. And Andrew, you had something to say.
That was actually what I was going to say. You have a very long list, resume list involved in movies, but of course, it has to start somewhere.
Yes.
All the way back to your movie loving origins, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I do remember very liminal moments very clearly. I remember all my first movies. I remember all the first experiences. I remember the first DVDs I bought, the first VHSs. So yeah, I think first memory I have is, in fact, one of my first ever memories is the eyes of David Banner in the Hulk TV series when he's changing the tire, and I must have been about maybe barely 3, and I think that would have been when it was on television, obviously as a TV movie. I think it was released theatrically in the UK. I might be wrong, but that was a big deal, and I was absolutely obsessed with the Incredible Hulk, and I still love that character. I still read the comic books. And yeah, it's kind of those memories that sort of forge kind of who you are later on in life and the sorts of things you're into. And I think if they are something that's quite visceral and has that impact and a very distinctive memory, now Watership Down's another one.
Oh yeah.
And then first cinematic memory of going to the cinema is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. That must have been a Disney re-release. But I was never taken to the cinema much. My parents, my dad's from an engineering background. My mum, sort of worked at the school I was at as a cook. And they're just not into that sort of thing. So I kind of grew up as an only child, sort of searching for things that were exciting and escapism all the time, really. And that's to go to the cinema. I remember clearly having to beg my parents to take me. They never used to just take me. And I can count 5 films on my hand growing up. And it was, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, E.T., obviously everybody saw E.T.
It's a good one.
Krull, and then the most influential film, I would say the film that really just blew me away and opened my eyes and started this obsession, was The Dark Crystal. And a complete contrast to that, the last film I ever saw with them was they took me to see Jaws: The Revenge in 87. So 82 is that liminal year of,
I was just
of seeing those films.
Yeah, because on your website, where it's richpieces.com, you mentioned specifically 1982.
Yeah, because the greatest year of cinema.
Yeah, it's notorious to be one of the best years of cinema.
I personally, there's going to be a lot of people who disagree, but I think I wouldn't say, you could argue it's not the greatest for film, but it's the greatest for movies. And I think it's the greatest for movies that have had a real impact and have been remembered, whether they flopped, whether they were hugely successful like E.T., but anything from there's even little obscurities like films I've discovered in the last few years. One from Kino Lorber that they released called The Grey Fox, which was just superb. And that's probably one of the best films I've discovered in the last sort of 5 or 6 years. That was 82. First Blood. There's so many of them. You can just, I've listed them on my website, but it's a great year for the movies. And I think that, I always kind of go back to that year because for me personally, it's a very important time for me that I went to see a film that I always revert back to and say, that is where it started my obsession with fantasy, with movies, with creativity. That's what it is about for me, is about the artistry and about the storytelling of film and how I am as fascinated in how all that's put together in the storytelling and the experience of watching those films.
Yeah, I think everybody's got a year, and I think even pop culture's caught up to understanding that there's certain years that just stand out. And I think one of the big ones is 1999. And for us, that's kind of a big one because it's, so
Phantom
many
Menace.
That's one of the big ones. Fight Club and things like it's Blair Witch. It's The Matrix. I think was 90.
The Matrix is in there.
It's a big year, and I think our friend Dan Scapalin even sent me a book that's about how great 1999 is. So you need to make a book.
Ring is Ring 99, or is that a little bit? Because that's 25th anniversary. It's celebrating soon, isn't it? Was it 98? Ring might be 98.
We're talking about Ringu, or
Ringu. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think the original Ringu is 1998. So it's
98.
This year is
25th, isn't it?
This year is the 25th anniversary.
It is. Yeah.
I wonder if we're going to get some type of special edition release from someone. Somewhere. We haven't get it. We did get like a Ringu box set a few years ago.
There's an Arrow set.
Arrow.
That Arrow set. I was just thinking they did just put out the whole Grudge set as well.
Yeah.
But
there's some great years in film, and we It's a fun way to really go down rabbit holes.
Oh yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I you know me, I'm a big history buff when it comes to where movies situate within history, within our society, over
Mhm.
Yeah.
time. And there are certain milestone years where you get, yeah, 1999 had like Magnolia, The Insider. We talked about like Fight Club and whatnot.
Yeah.
It's yeah, that was a very interesting year. I mean, Steven, you remember it. We were young at the time.
10 years
I was
old. I was
I was like
10.
12. I believe I was
Yeah.
12 at the time.
Yeah.
In those formative years of going to the movies still every weekend to see whatever new release there was. Still, that was right around the time, DVDs were kind of a mythological thing at the time. They were
At least for as a kid,
just
yeah.
starting to come out really. I
Yeah.
think some of the earlier DVD releases may have been even 98, 97 or so, maybe around there, but that was when like, whoa, what is the difference between DVD and VHS? And they were really pushing the difference
Mhm.
between digital cinema and all this kind of stuff. And it wouldn't be until like the year later that I would get my first DVD player, and then so on and
Yeah.
so forth. But it's just kind of fascinating how things go. But for you, Rich, um, how did you go from kind of being this movie loving younger person to kind of wanting to get into more professional areas of whether it be film journalism or whatever other work you've been doing?
Well, like I said, I used to sort of dabble with it by sort of submitting reviews to magazines in the early noughties. But then my kind of career path changed, and all sorts of things happened. I ended up getting married and having a kid, and um, the sort of the focuses became more about my lecturing and the education side of things. So it's about managing that really, and I was so focused on that career and still am. That's what I do. The majority of my time is impart knowledge and mentor and tutor students at degree level. And so that's what kind of took me away from that. But I think just prior to the pandemic, I kind of sort of reassessed things and thought, well, do you know what? I have got more time now. My daughter's getting older, and I just thought I'm going to get back into it and pitch some ideas and contact magazines and contact boutique labels and just put some work out there. I think some of the earlier stuff was I got back to sort of doing stuff for Little White Lies again, which to be honest was Little White Lies. It was just a couple of articles that they're an amazing publication. I love Little White Lies, and what that magazine represents for me is it's everything. I mean, if you look at that, I mean, it's
Yeah.
beautiful, isn't it?
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's gorgeous. For me, that's as much about I can show the graphic design students a Little White Lies magazine as much as I can the film students, because it's just beautifully put together. But from my own point of view, it was literally I got some articles done. It was enough to kind of just get something out there for them to point other people towards. And then I'd been working on a project which for a boutique label, which has unfortunately been shelved. It will see release, but around that time, 3 years ago, I wrote this book on a film that you will all know about. And once it hits, it will be a big deal. But there was this Weinstein sized scandal that just completely broke, and rightly so. It just dragged everybody into it, including Fangoria. I'm sure some listeners will figure out which film it is, and which production company as well. But unfortunately, yeah, myself and the people involved, the label, the magazine, they all kind of handled it in the right way, and we just shelved it, and I moved forward. And the irony is that project that's been shelved is the very thing that led me towards Fangoria. And that's just been a constant thing. And then, yeah, other magazines, other labels. I've been quite fortunate to write for some of the other boutiques like 101 and Eureka and God, what else is there? Arrow.
Arrow, yeah.
I write mainly for the Arrow Films blog, but there's been the odd releases, Enter the Void, that I've worked on, which was a great one to do. And that's another interesting thing to talk about, really, is that I think my input. I mean, I'm certainly not as prolific as people like Lee, Gambin, and Kat. That that it's amazing the output they get to work on, because they're just that's that. To be honest, at the end of the day, Kat specifically, that's her job. That's the only job that she has, and she really relies on that. And it's amazing what she puts out. So I obviously have other focuses, but I want to kind of move towards that, but know the reality of it. It's quite a fickle industry, and I think you have to just sort of be aware that there's other people out there that are doing probably a much better job than I am. But I'm more than willing to just take on anything, and I will take on anything. I'm somebody I pride myself in being fairly ambitious, and I will, if somebody offers, oh, do you want to have a go at this? Do you want to try a video essay? Do you want to try production? Do you want to? Then yeah, of course, I'll just do it, and I'll give it a go. And I think just having that kind of general attitude, really, and just having a go at something, and producing the writing and putting as much stuff out there as possible is kind of what that's my drive, really. That's what keeps me awake at night and keeps me occupied at night. And I guess the downside of that, and I'm sure most people will understand, is that the more you get drawn into it, the less you get to watch. But I literally sometimes watch a film, and if it's not engaging me, I'm at the point now where I just go, I could be writing, and I literally switch the film off and I just write instead, because I find that more productive. And and also I usually get inspired by something anyway when I'm watching or I'm reading something. I'll just immediately go and sit in the library, in the study, and start knocking out a piece, and that's on my schedule, which is constant. There's stuff, it's a solid schedule that keeps me occupied in my free time to be able to actually put some work out there, which first and foremost I'm very proud of, and I'm hoping people are engaged with it. And if they read it, that's a bonus, but I'm not writing it predominantly just to be to feed my ego. This is just something that I just love to do and have a passion for, and always have.
No, it's just like us with the podcast. We can try our best to get people to listen, but ultimately we like doing this because we enjoy the Blu-rays, we enjoy all the effort put into them, and we enjoy pulling back the curtain on some of the people that are involved in making them things, so people can appreciate them more. And for us, just alone, it's rewarding. And yeah, I mean, I think what people got to start, when if they're ever ambitious and wanting to get into something with entertainment or anything like that, they got to first remember it needs to be about your love for the thing itself, other than what you get in return for it. You're not going to succeed if you're too busy worrying about the end result all the time. It's sometimes it's about getting invested in that thing and letting it take you over, and letting it make you passionate about it. And that's the only way you're going to be, I think, successful too. I mean, it's hard unless you just have a lot of people supporting you. When you're doing it alone, it has to be about your love for the thing itself. And so, yeah, I mean, somebody that has to do a lot of lecturing, a lot of education, teaching people, and needing to find the time to then do research on other things to do, contributing and things like that. That's your passion has to drive that, to be able to get that extra time in. Because when you're dealing with all these other people,
you've got to be able to walk into a lesson, whether it's a 16-year-old or whether it's a 66-year-old. And that's what it's like for me. I have students that I'm in further education, but then I course lead degree, and then I'll go right up to the final year of the BA level. So what I get to see is a real kind of journey of some students that sometimes I can be with them from 16 all the way through to them doing the BA if they decide to stay on. So because it happens to be a college that delivers degrees, that's a really nice thing to see. And you see these people sort of grow into, you know, to proper adults and get a career. So another part of it for me is the networking is so crucial, because it's something that I want to kind of hopefully pass on and enable people to be able to get those jobs. So, you know, if I have some graphic design students that I'm trying to get them into a company that I'm, you know, in touch with, and same with, you know, if there's anybody that I see some talent there, you know, whether it's at college or not, it could be within just a circle of, you know, writers or somebody that I happen to be, you know, linked to via another publication, then, you know, I'm all for that. But, you know, it's kind of just, I think it's just about paying it forward a little bit. And it's always been about that for me, because I appreciate how difficult it is, and sort of just, you know, trying to help as many people as you can. Just, again, educate them. But a lot of the time it is, and this what I see all the time is nearly 20 years now of being a lecturer. And I always come back to, you can be as talented as you know, you could be really talented, be an amazing illustrator, you can be an amazing writer, you can be this incredible filmmaker. But if your attitude stinks, you know, you ain't going to get anywhere.
Nobody's going to want to work with you.
Nobody is going to want to work with you. And it's really still surprising today that that's usually that a lot of the energy is taken up trying to make young people realize that, because, you know, the world has changed and is constantly changing. Yeah, more so now than ever. And I think they just need to, and I think obviously post lockdown as well has had a massive impact, that you go into a lesson and there's a real kind of, you've got the sort of students that have come out like they're uncaged and they've been housed up for ages, and they're just in a lesson and they're constantly talking about anything but what they're learning about. And then you get the really introverted ones who have become even more introverted because they've been locked away. So there's those sorts of things you're having to deal with, and how you approach them at their level and how you engage with them. So yeah, most of the time it can be taken up trying to understand who they are, what they're into, what they enjoy doing. And I'll be honest, some of them can literally just shrug their shoulders. They don't know themselves yet, and they don't really kind of get, they don't really know what they're into. But then you look at the screen and it's like, Jesus, it's like, that's an incredible illustration. What's inspired you there? And you know, it's just trying to sort of pull things out of them and trying to sort of engage, because sometimes, you know, you can walk into a lesson, you've got to understand at the back of your mind that how you might be coming across to them is, you know, just think back to when you were 15, 16, and did you have confidence? Were you kind of a little bit intimidated by a lecturer that would walk into the room and you know, engage with you in some way or show you things? And you know, that can be what it's like. And I think you just have to just be mindful of that. Anyway,
one thing about
deviating slightly, but that's my approach, and
that's great.
Most things, really.
I was going to say, you know, one thing I think that an aspect of any kind of teacher or anybody educator that I think gets underlooked is needing to have kind of like a psychology, you know, having an ability to think about people's psychology, because that's important to teaching somebody, is figuring out how they think.
It's very, and it gets very difficult, I would say, because everything, like you just said, Rich, everything is changing all the time, including the students. You know what I mean? Like you've been doing it for 20 years. I assume students you had 10, 20 years ago are much different, whether it be mentally or culturally, or just kind of how they approach things and just how the education world is structured.
Yeah,
you know what
absolutely
I mean? It's
polarizing.
It's vastly changing very quickly. I mean, my education life went basically from the time I was a little child in the early 90s all the way up until 2016, 2017, and it was vastly different. You know, by the time I got all the way to the end through higher education and through college and things like that. And I can't even imagine the way it is now from 5-6 years ago, must be massively different.
Mm.
And just to have to deal with also people having to deal with people who are both younger as well as older, you can see the maturity and the mindset about, just focusing on things. When you're younger, you really don't know what you want to do, and the older you get, maybe you become more focused, or maybe
Mm.
sometimes you still don't know what you want to
or,
do.
or 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 you already have ideas about what you like, and you're not willing to open up as much as you'd like them
True.
to.
Or sometimes you just
You
don't
know,
even know what avenues are open to you when it comes to
You
what you
don't.
like or what you're into. And
No.
sometimes educators can pick up on that and they can kind of guide you, and other times they can't. Really all
well,
depends on
sometimes
quality
there's
of the
too many
educator.
students. One of the
Well,
biggest
that
problems with
is
Yeah.
educators is they can't
that is
focus in
something.
on people as well as they'd like, because there's too many of them.
Yeah.
We need more
Fortunately,
educators.
fortunately, I was able to go to, I guess, smaller attendance schools, and I guess that was helpful in that
Yeah, yeah.
regard.
Well, that helps. Yeah.
But even then, it's still difficult because you have so much diversity amongst the student body
Hmm.
and amongst the people, and it's tough. And that's not even engaging with the material, because as we've learned just by listening, whether it be Chasing Labels or whether it be whatever other podcast, movies have changed rapidly, and our interpretation of them is changing, I think, all the time, because we're learning so much more and our world is changing. So we're trying to analyze the films and then also analyze our world as well. And that gets
Mm.
into kind of like probably a lot of things that you talk about when it comes to
Well,
like film theories and things like
I was
that.
gonna
And
say,
um,
I was reading through one of your recent articles where you talked about the 30th anniversary of Aliens 3,
Mm.
and how, and of course that, I think that some of the things in that are still, it was relevant then, relevant today, with when it comes to abortion.
mm,
So yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, we're always reevaluating and kind of picking up more on things that we didn't realize that were important in a film that's 30 years old now.
yeah,
Like
sometimes,
it's
well, a lot of things we like to point out here on Chasing Label. Sometimes when we do talk about these movies, is a lot of movies get more relevant over time when they're dealing with certain cultural issues, whether it be like you just said, Stephen, sexual politics, or whether it deal with reproductive rights or things like that,
Mm.
or whether it deal with race issues or class issues or whatever. Those issues still stay relevant, and each generation has to address those issues. So it's kind of fascinating how, cinema can, assist you in that, because a lot of the things that they were talking about in cinemas 50 years ago is still relevant to this day. So I think
It's
it's also kind of important that we still have access to these movies too. That's
no,
where the whole physical media
absolutely.
thing comes in.
I think it's about the discussion that is around that piece of art. That's what it should be about. And there is a degree of hearsay, and some people can see it as a bit tenuous, and a lot of people just want to watch a film and that's it and switch off. They don't want to analyze it. Um, and again, coming back to kind of learners and of certain ages, you sort of go into a lecture or a lesson, and again, you've got to gauge that right, because they'll just zone out, they'll switch off. And I think that's really important, that you just sell the art and you sort of show them what it is on the surface, and then you have to start breaking it down, because as soon as you say the word research, it's like, you know
People,
no,
you,
you've got yeah, you've
oh
got
yeah,
to
if you're
kind of
if
you've got to show that. You've got to
right,
show it. And I think you've got to put a film on, and you've got to allow them just to at least absorb it, because really the film itself is the piece of research. They don't realize they're researching, but the film is informing them. In the same way that going back to growing up, you fill your head with these fantasy worlds and these stories that you escape to, and growing up, that is all they are. And then when you start looking back, you realize that's actually become part of me. That's really shaped who I am. It's informed me. It's given me a version of what has happened in the world. It's not the truth, unless you're watching, certain documentaries. But everything surrounding how that film was made and the story it was telling, and like we were saying, the context of that is absolutely crucial. And I think that is what I love to write about. That's what I draw on. And I think any good piece of journalism or writing should be about presenting the film, but then drawing everything else in around that, and just sort of, somebody goes away and they've read that piece, and they've not just learned about the film, they've learned about something else surrounding it. And if it is Alien 3 and abortion, which some people would just go, it's just a sci-fi movie, what's he on about? Whereas other people go, oh my God, I never thought of it like that. Then you've kind of done your job, haven't you? And put it to bed, hopefully.
Yeah, I don't know where this quote comes from. Maybe I just made it up, or maybe I heard it and I'm just paraphrasing it.
You're quoting yourself. Oh,
probably.
God.
Who knows? I just pick up things out of nowhere. But basically, I think it was saying like the idea that all art is political in some way, or all art can be interpreted in political ways. It's not even just politics, but it's just kind of the idea that you can draw conclusions out of art because it's inherently, that's why it's there, to interpret, to get things from. It's not just there to be something beautiful that you just look at. I mean, it can be that, but it can be so much more. That's the kind of the beauty with art, whether it be cinema, music, or just, paintings and sculptures.
It absolutely
they can be so many things.
That's precisely what it is. And, terrifyingly, when you look at the really, really negative aspects of that, art is politics and art is debate. And the worst example of that is Adolf Hitler. However you look at it, he was an artist, and he was somebody who, swayed so far the other way. I'm not even going to go into that, but we all know what happened there.
Ironically,
and that's the really horrible thing about it is that
they utilized artwork for propaganda. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Utilized the movies, utilized marketing campaigns to push the horrific ideology that they were trying to impose on the world at the time. And and many are still trying to do that to this day. I bring this up all the time. History is cyclical in a lot of things, and we see it coming back now, and we see it coming back in movies as well. A lot of the things that were in movies, 50, 60 years ago are back again, and they keep recycling. I'm not just talking about like movie remakes or making sequels to movies that are 30, 40 years old. That's just Hollywood doing their thing. But I'm just talking about, the same topics and ideas and themes are
they will drive an agenda, and they will drive a message. And I think one of the other examples of that is if you look at New Hollywood, and you look at the kind of 1967 to 77, and you look at how politicized 70s cinema is, and then how it turned on its heel in the 80s and reverted back to the old Hollywood formula of entertainment, and it just dropped politics and just became about pure cinema again. And I think that's why, when I look back on the films that were influential on me, is because they were so much fun, and they weren't bogged down in anything like that. They were just about the old school. Raiders of the Lost Ark. You watch Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it's just an incredible movie. It's one of the greatest movies ever made, period. It's certainly the greatest action movie ever made, in my opinion. And for me, I don't ever watch Raiders of the Lost Ark and still to this day feel like I need to sit down and analyze it. I can just sit and watch it, and it still blow my mind in terms of how amazing that film is. Of course, you can dig into it. You can write a piece about, the influence of film serials and the way, and again, like exactly what we've just been talking about, basically. But art is politics.
And the reason why anything can be politics is because, and this is what I think people for some reason don't like to deal with too much when watching film nowadays, is but how any piece of art can make you feel something. It's not necessarily about the literal thing that it's speaking to you, but you can look at something and can make you feel a certain way. And it's all about that feeling that is invoked in you when you're watching something or listening to something. And that's what makes us think about other things. And then that informs our own, our own opinions inside ourselves. And us coming up with our own conclusions about what this thing
Right.
is,
It
what
can
it's
Well,
trying
I
to
think
say.
that's where again boutique labels, physical media has introduced hell of a lot of work that is being reassessed, that is so visceral and controversial, and films that back in the days of the video nasty, the
Yeah.
experience of watching that on VHS was it grainy, and you'd have to take the VHS back out and put it back in because it got stuck. All of that experience of watching something so gnarly, it was just it was heightened by the VHS quality. Now you're getting stuff that's like 4K remasters of like Cannibal Holocaust, and these films are kind of looked at in a slightly different way. They're still extremely powerful, but even myself, I absolutely adore animation. Animation's a big thing to me, but I just love cinema, and I will watch anything, even if it challenges myself. So that kind of, the idea of sort of watching something that is going to really, really push my own buttons, and I will have a particular opinion on whether I like that or not, but still write it as a piece, as a piece of, again, a conversation about something. I try not to. That's another thing I try not to do. Is since I've got back into the writing, is I want to focus. I've always wanted to focus more on features anyway, because I don't really like the term film critic, because I'm not a film critic. I see myself as more of an analyst, and sort of looking at things, picking it apart, and then just allowing people to then just forge their own opinions on that. Rather than just sort of criticize something for the sake of criticizing. There's too much of that. The internet has created too much of that,
it's simplified. I mean, it's too simplified. We know that, I'm not necessarily gonna shit on this place, but Rotten Tomatoes just really kind of has simplified criticism when it comes to any specifically film. So you're wanting to make sure that what you're doing feels like there's thoughtfulness in it, and that's important to you, and I think that should be important to a lot of people when they're reading things too. Like, they should care about thoughtfulness.
I mean, Rotten Tomatoes is probably the most I actually had the word in my head and I completely forgot. Probably the most misinterpreted idea of what film criticism is on the internet, because they just see the number and they just kind of equate the number to quality versus actually realizing what the number suggests.
Yes.
Where, you know what I mean? I don't want to break down the whole, like, what the actual number is and all that stuff. So many people do that, but I'm just saying it's the simplification of that I think is very harmful. Just attaching a number to a film without actually engaging with it at all. It just,
and then going beyond that, you start putting little Rotten Tomatoes things on Blu-ray releases, and they don't even look at a number now. Now they just see that there's a tomato on something, and that means it's good, it's fresh. So they don't even need a number now. They just know it's fresh.
I know
it feeds into the general public, doesn't it? It's the general public's immediate response, a shorthand for them. It's not, it doesn't. They're not for the niche. It's not about that. It's just about very, very quickly summarizing something, so that when they see that graphic and when they see the percentage, it must be great. That's what they go for.
It must be bad.
Yeah, or it must be bad.
Or it must be bad. And
this is the sad thing, isn't it? It's like,
cinema's so much more than that. Whether something is good or bad. That's
when
why,
you know how much work goes into it as well, into making a film.
That's why when people ask me, because they know I watch a lot of movies, they know I'm into movies and stuff, they're like, "Oh, is the movie any good?" And it's like, how do I tell it? Like, it's like, how do I break that down? Every movie has good qualities, bad qualities. It all depends on who you are as a viewer. What do you view as bad? What do you view as good? Because what I may view of those two things may be completely different. So it's like, I don't know how to quite answer that question.
But it's one of them tough things is and we've discussed this before, is that, you know, the way the world is, people don't have a lot of time. They're not spending a lot of time investigating, and you know, people that are just casual film lovers, you know, and that's fine, you know, don't have the time to investigate. And so they look at something like Rotten Tomatoes as being very convenient for them to maybe curate what they watch. And
Yeah, very true.
it sucks, but it's also, there's an understanding that I understand that people can't do like what we do. They don't invest that much time.
We live in a bubble, I would say, in terms of
There is.
how serious we view cinema, how serious we view film. Our interpretation of it is unique. You know what I mean? You know, I say this all the time to people, and I don't even think I can quite explain my love of cinema to people, because it's not something. It's not a something to pass the time. It's not a hobby. It's not, you know,
It's unconditional. It's unconditional.
It's literally my life.
Yeah.
It's been
Yeah.
my life for years. Like from the time I wake up till the time I pass out watching a movie, I'm always thinking about movies. It's always on my mind. I'm always doing something regarding movies. So you know, it's a unique relationship that you can't quite explain, because to a lot of people, movies are just entertainment. They are just, you know, it's just something that they go to see on the big screen, or whether they watch at home when it comes to streaming or physical media or whatever the case may be. But to other people, it's a lot more serious. You can't quite, you know, bridge that gap sometimes. So it's kind of tough depending on who you are. But it just kind of incredible, just the way we consume movies now. You know, Rich, we talked a little bit, you know, before the show about, you know, kind of, you know, the availability of movies, how streaming has kind of opened that up, and physical media has opened that up. Now, specifically, we talked about it many times here, Steven. There's been an explosion of the boutique labels, I think, over the last I would say 3 to 4 years now. I never remember the boutique labels being this big of a presence in the physical media world.
And maybe we're just in that bubble, but I don't.
I don't know, because
I don't know.
We've been collecting for a while. We knew
Yeah.
Criterion's been around, Kino's been around, Arrow's been around, Blue Underground's been around. All of these smaller labels have been around, but I don't think they've been as prominent, or I've been putting out as much in as high as quality as we have available now. Because, you know, the tech is kind of advanced.
And there's a lot of new labels are coming every year, and there's
we get new labels dropping all the time, and they're putting
it's
out.
Still a very
great stuff.
niche. It's very niche market.
It is.
It's still
that's
niche,
without a doubt. And
but bigger than before.
I go into, you know, university and college, and in the sessions, if I'm delivering, and also I do cinema courses as well. So when I'm, you know, the great thing about the cinema courses is it's people of all ages just paying for film appreciation. Absolutely love those courses, and you can go in and you have your list of films for the 10 weeks. But I would say there's probably only 1 out of 25 that would actually go and watch that physically. The rest of them are all. So that gives you a real snapshot. In the university, there is nobody, not a single student, that even understands or knows what physical media is. They don't know what, you know, in terms of a DVD, they've probably heard of it, but they haven't heard of the specifics. They will always default to DVD, but the word Blu-ray, you know, 4K, anything like that is alien to them.
We're getting close to a time where
that's what I'm getting to see.
Yeah, we're getting close to a time where young people we're getting closer and closer to where young people have only experienced streaming. Like, because my daughter that was born this year will be living in a time where streaming's at its height, and when she grows up, could still be
I think we've reached that point.
Have we?
I mean,
we have. It's saturated. We are at a saturation point, and it is always about, you know, it's not very often unless you're subscribed to a very specific streaming service, that if you look at the big ones, I mean, Netflix is definitely something shifting there with what's been happening in the last few months. But it's very rare they put really old classic movies on. It's always about looking forward, and it's always about just knocking stuff out. I think Shudder is amazing. Shudder's incredible because it's very selective and gives a platform for new up and coming filmmakers. I think that's probably one of the best examples. Whereas the rest of them are just about making money. And I personally, I really can't stand streaming. I really can't. And I've tried so hard to keep off it for as long as possible. And I only subscribe to it really because, when I have my daughter and the certain programs she watches, if she wants to watch them, I don't want to kind of prevent her from seeing the things she wants to watch.
Mm.
But at the end of the day, we have a library and we can watch stuff from that as well. But I tried Disney Plus, lasted probably about 3 months, sick of it. And I love the Marvel movie, or have loved the Marvel movies as much as I love cult cinema. And it's okay to like both. That's okay. I hate this divide and argument of, I can't stand the MCU because I'd rather watch, some really obscure Russian, it's bullshit. Cinema. Do you love cinema? But saying that, I have got to the point where I'm so sick of. I feel fatigued by superhero movies, and I just can't watch them anymore. I can't watch the MCU stuff anymore. It's just so poor because it's just quantity over quality, churning it out. But again, cyclical. I'm sure that will come back and they'll reassess and they'll probably think about how they're going to handle it. Maybe.
Right.
But under Disney, it's a global thing, isn't it? It's a huge, huge brand, one of the largest on the planet. It's making a hell of a lot of money. So that's where we are. Whereas the boutiques are all about looking at that past catalogue and educating us all about cinema. And I think that's the crux of it. There's some just incredible work out there, which I am more than happy just to stick to that because I feel that, there's loads of films from the past I've still not seen. And I'd rather watch those because they're going to educate me more than watching most current cinema, to be honest.
Right,
There's some amazing stuff out there, don't get me wrong, but
it's also, it gets frustrating because there is quality cinema being made today. The thing is it keeps getting lost amongst everything because there's so much.
The sad thing.
And I've always said this for years. It's streaming is it's giving us access to more things now than ever. But I've been thinking about this actually over the last kind of week or so, is that it's unreliable access because we're learning now, or at least right now, there's no permanence to anything when it comes to streaming.
Nothing.
Like things that you thought were going to not go away can go away in just on in a moment's notice. You know what I mean? We're seeing kind of the
cancel a
implosion.
TV series before it's even properly started. What is the point in starting to watch a television series anymore? Because you know that potentially they're just going to cancel it after the first season. I don't watch a lot of television. I don't have the time. It's just one of them things I have to put aside. I used to play video games a decade ago. I had to put that aside, and that's fine. I'm happy to do that. But TV it's got to be something exceptional for me to invest 10 hours of my life into watching something which could potentially then just get cancelled. And that's what streaming has created. Is this culture of, yes, it's this platform, great for new creatives, fine. But then if you're going to pull the rug from under something which is genuinely brilliant, because a lot of them are, some of them, can be very, very good TV series, but I just get really fed up of them watching it and go, what? So now there's not going to be another series. I just wasted 10 hours of my life.
Right, very much. And I would even say that kind of applies also to movies with licensing deals, distribution deals, things lapsing, or a movie will be on a service for a couple of months maybe, and then it'll be gone for a couple of months and then show up on another service someplace else. And it's just like there's no, there's no permanence there. You don't know where anything is going to be at any specific time, and it's difficult to kind of keep up with all of that. That's why physical media does have that kind of permanence to it. I can always go and watch whatever it's something that I want. If there's a specific movie, I can watch it. But I also understand, we talked about this many times, Stephen, a lot of people don't have the funds to buy physical
No, of
media,
course,
to
yeah,
have
and that's completely
television
understandable.
setups and all this kind of stuff. Everybody, it all depends on your situation. So the convenience of streaming has is what is
Mm,
part of our lives now. It is part of the younger generations coming up, and I think it's going to just continue onward. Not even for tiny children. I think teenagers and young adults, like
yeah.
many of them, don't even have televisions. They just stream via laptops or tablets or things like that because the technology and the way we view movies is constantly changing.
Yeah,
And I
it
was just
is. I
thinking,
mean, it absolutely is. You
yeah,
know, a lot of it is to do with funds and what people can afford. And we're living in a world now which is getting even worse in terms of, I don't want to dive down that rabbit hole, but
mm,
it's always there. It's at the back of our minds, constantly one bad thing after the next. I mean, I try and make a conscious effort of I just disconnect from the news completely. I don't even have
Yeah.
an aerial on my house. I don't even connect to terrestrial TV, nothing. I try to disconnect from that as much as possible because it's just not good for your mental health. It's
mm,
as simple as that.
Yeah.
Just try and measure and select the information that you want to read about. And to be honest, I think if you're fortunate enough to be able to be social enough, or that you're going to work and you're sat in an office and you see people or you see students, you will learn or know what's happening out in the world because they will have conversations with you. So my news fix comes from talking to people, and then you get in the morning and people go, "Oh, you heard about such and such?" And they'll tell you about it. I don't feel like I've constantly got to be hooked to a smartphone pinging news feed all the time. No wonder people, it's feeding into the way they're feeling. It's awful. um
Yeah.
but I think, or going back to films and the physical media side of things, it's about you're investing in knowledge, you're investing in um the physicality of it, the booklet, the extra features, again coming back to the education of that, is that if I think back to when I did probably start collecting films, which was about 1991, 1992, I would have gone through maybe a decade of VHS, 8, 9, 10 years, then DVD. I think 2000, 2001, I probably started collecting those, and then sort of morphing into 2K and 4K. It's a lot. It's a lot. You kind of take it for granted because every day you walk in maybe into a room where you've got your paraphernalia and it's there all of a sudden. But then you just have to step back and go, well, actually, no, that's 30 years worth of, or a lifetime's worth. I mean, literally, one room I've got is an archive and it's the comic book collection and it's the DVD archive, and everything is there. And I think, actually, no, it's longer than 30 years. It's literally, I can pick out the first ever book I bought, the
yeah,
first ever comic book I bought, the first ever VHS, the first DVD, the first Blu-ray. It's moments, and that's what it creates. It forges memories, and it really does make you think about, not just the film itself, but where was I at that point when I listened
Yeah.
to that piece of music?
oh
Where was
yeah,
I when I watched that movie? I think
That's
it's
why I always try to push the cinematic experience because
yeah,
if you're just watching everything on your phone, you can't be like, where was I when
no,
I first
not at
watched this
all.
movie? Just sitting in my bed watching it on my little tiny phone.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. That's very
we
true.
all watch films alone, but at the end of the day, it's like Tarantino champions the whole idea of that communal experience, and it should be
Yeah.
about that. If it's a communal experience of just being with your child or with your wife or with your family or a bunch of friends, or it's going and sitting with 120 strangers in a dark room, then that is absolutely the communal part of watching film that you don't necessarily think about when you're watching it because you're completely lost in the movie. But when you come away from it, you think, oh my God, I've just experienced that with all these other people that are going to go away and maybe talk about it.
Right.
Or,
It,
or at least, remember it, have a memory and go, oh,
well, I
this,
mean, yeah, and then you have maybe you'll have an interesting story to tell about it. Or
definitely.
maybe you kind of add some little extra things that may or may not have happened,
Yeah.
just to make things sound a little more interesting.
Or that
Maybe.
you relate to it. Isn't that another thing what film is about? Do you relate to one of the characters? Do you relate to the story? That's another huge part of watching certain films, specifically dramas, that that you're in a mood to watch a drama because you want to watch something relatable, or I'm in the
Yeah.
mood to watch something which is escapist, or I'm in the mood to watch something that is surreal and completely makes me think about, what the fuck was that I just watched?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
had no clue what that was about, but I want to understand it. That's the beauty of cinema. It's just there's so many different versions and interpretations of it, in the same way of looking at a painting and
Yeah.
taking away something personal from that. You'll always take something away personal from a film, whether it's intended or not.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
very much so. I mean, yeah, it's also it's part of our lives, I think, a lot more closely than
Mm,
people realize. I know some people are not into movies, some people are not into TV, some people are not into music. So there's always something I think people are into that is a huge part of their lives.
mm,
Whether whatever it may be. I mean, it just happens, I think all of us, at least, the people who listen to the show here, people we've talked to on the show here, all have a commonality, whether it be collecting movies, the love of movies, or just physical media in general. And that kind of has connected us. And we're people from different walks of life all over the world, yet we still have one commonality of the love of movies that kind of connects
mm.
us all. And we can have discussions and talk about things, even though we could be completely different people in every other facet. We still have that that in common. So movies are keeping us together, I guess, while the world kind of gets more and more divisive. I guess movies are keeping us together. Although movies
give
can be
movies a chance.
yeah, movies
Yeah.
can be divisive though. I mean, if you've been on the internet for more than 5 minutes or go on Twitter, people fight over movies all the time
Yeah.
in the most ridiculous ways. Lots of gatekeeping. I didn't realize that
Oh,
gatekeeping was such
don't
a
get me
thing.
started on
I've been
gatekeeping.
going again. I've been bringing it up a few times because it happens. It happens even now. When it comes to collecting movies, people will
Mm,
say like, "Oh, why is this label putting out this movie? This is not what they do," or I don't like this," or whatever the case may be. And I'm like, just wait. There's something else is gonna come that you're gonna like in a minute. So just wait." And because everything is so fluid and changing now, that if you don't like this slate of releases, the chances are there's gonna be a slate next month anyway that you may like. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And there's no rules to say a specific company has to put out a certain type of movie. You know what I mean? There's nothing like that. And it's just kind of nonsense to me because we're living in an abundance of riches now that we really need to kind of relish in, because one day this will probably all be gone. Like the physical media it will be going. Like you said earlier, kind of come back around. We are kind of maybe plateauing when it comes to physical media, especially format wise and tech wise. I think 4K may be the end of physical media on disc format.
mm.
I know some companies are making 8K TVs and stuff, but I don't know if the physical media format will support it. I don't know if it has the weight in it for another format change. I don't really want to have to do the whole
No.
finances all over again to upgrade these releases. You know
I
what I
mean,
mean?
I'm very selective of 4K. I mean, some of it looks astonishing, but I still think, I still watch the odd DVD, to be honest. I still go and grab a film that I've got. Blu-ray for me is still looks incredible.
Yeah.
It's an
I'm with you
incredible
there.
format, and it still looks gorgeous, and it's still just soft enough to retain the texture of film. And I think there's a lot of 4K is they start to then try and market the whole HDR. Oh, it's got HDR. It's black. The blacks are blacker, and and they kind of use that to sell the film more so than it being about the resolution of it and the
Mm,
size of it. You've got to have a certain size television anyway to even benefit from having 4K, or what's the point? Blu-ray, if you have on a smaller telly, is going to be as good a quality as the 4K. They know that, which is then why they push the blacks are blacker. It's
right.
that
They
for
need
me
honest-
is the
marketing
kind of
tool.
it's the marketing of
yeah.
it which really annoys me. And
Honestly,
I'm
the
quite happy
sound
them watching
quality
that.
is more important to me when it comes to upping anything nowadays
Yeah,
anyway, because there's a
yeah.
lot of Blu-rays that I've gotten that the mixes are terrible. Like
Mm,
there'll be
I
something where it's
yeah.
really, really soft, and then it just suddenly gets really loud, and I'm like, Jesus
Yeah,
Christ!
the
yeah,
Like,
mixing,
yeah.
it's still an
yeah,
issue to this day.
yeah.
I mean, a lot of early Blu-ray releases had really poorly, like, audio stuff going on. They were still
Yeah.
using, like, DVD audio and whatnot, and then
Which is a real contrast.
it takes a few
Yeah.
years to kind of, I wouldn't even say perfect the new format, just to make improvements in general on it, and I think we're in that
Mm,
phase right now with 4K, with UHD, where they're making, changes, they're making improvements to it ever so slightly when it comes to how they can remaster these older films to make them look really good in 4K. The HDR is a whole new gambit of things because that's dealing with the whole aesthetic of a movie, like when it
very.
comes to
Yeah.
colors, when it comes to, like you said, blacks being blacker. Well, and then you kind of open it up to the discussion. Is this the way the movie's supposed to look? I know Steven,
Mm.
you bring that up all the time.
We
What
yeah,
is
we've
the
had a lot of
intent? You know what I mean? A
There's
lot of
only
these
there's only one or two films I've seen with the HDR where I felt it really benefit, and I think the Blade Runner, the original
mm,
Blade Runner,
yeah, that does look
looks
pretty
absolutely
gorgeous.
astonishing. I mean, that is absolutely phenomenal in 4K. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head, but that's the one I would use as a
Oh, yeah,
go-to. I
yeah,
think
I
it
agree with you
works
on that
well
one.
as an older movie as well. It works
I know
brilliantly.
for a lot of, and it's interesting because, there, like Steven, like you've said, like the whole changing of the aesthetic, and I was just gonna bring up the fact that a lot of the people who worked on a lot of the older films are no longer with us, so we don't know what it comes to intent. I know, Steven, you always bring up, I mean, this actually doesn't have anything to do with the argument I was just making, but I just read this in an article the other day, that's why I'm bringing it up, is the Matrix thing, where the interpretation of the way the Matrix is supposed to look when it comes to the Wachowskis versus what it looks to the cinematographer are obviously two different aesthetics. And you notice when if you pop in the old Blu-rays or if you pop in the new 4Ks, completely different aesthetics. And people notice things like that. Well, Steven and others do.
Well, I mean, sometimes I don't care, but Matrix is a personal movie to me that I loved the kind of the green hue of that film that they kind of lessened in the newest
Mm.
4K. And it's all about access. I like if we can have both versions where I get the way it looked before, which I know that that's very privileged and very wanting to have everything the way I want it, but it's like you know for and as we've been talking about kind of a central theme of this discussion, how films create memories and create things of our how there are our past and our present, and like that to me, that the way I saw that movie is part of who I am, how my past, why I love movies. And when you start to mess with it, it upsets me because it takes away what I remember about it. I'm looking at it now and I'm like, I don't feel the same anymore. This doesn't feel the
Mm,
same as what I remember it. And I don't think it's always good to be super nostalgic about everything in our lives. We have to let things go sometimes. But, you know, some things I like to hang on to,
right. And
it,
we've had discussions on here, Rich, where we've talking about like, what happens when a director goes back and changes something about a movie, whether it be aesthetically, whether it be making a new cut of a movie.
Mm.
We've talked about that many times on here. Just because, like, do you feel more forgivable of that because it is the director who's doing it, or do you still are beholden to the movie in the version that you've always known it to be? And it
Yeah.
just it really all depends on the person, I guess.
It's
You know what
their
I mean?
vision at the end of the day. I think if they are a certain filmmaker who still likes to tinker and sort of go back to their films and try and get them, more precise or aligned to how they originally saw it, then yeah, fine. I think sometimes they can just overcook the egg though and just kind of then sort of ruin it.
Yeah,
But
and there are
there's
a
certainly
lot of
some instances where
mm,
those filmmakers go back and yeah, absolutely. They kind of polish it even more and make it even better. But I think most of the time, I mean, I'm not a massive fan of director's cuts, to be honest. There's very few director's cuts I've seen where I think, I mean, I remember seeing the Aliens director's cut on VHS. It was a big thing that was when that came out. And I still today, although most people love it and they prefer it to original, I find it quite jarring. I find some of the scenes almost sort of look a little bit like they were shot for television. I don't know why, and whether it's, you know, because it was taken out and then put back in. And you usually realize, it makes you think, well, actually, now I can see why it was left out, because it just doesn't work, or it slows the film down. And I think what it becomes is, it's a lot of the time it's about giving more to us, more to the fans, more to those that love the movies. And that's what it becomes about, because we can't get enough of that film. So we will watch any little tiny bit. It's like Lord of the Rings extended edition. Yeah, let's put as much more stuff in there as possible, which are brilliant. I love the extended editions. And again, I think the Lord of the Rings films are another good example of when we looked at those early days of DVD and those incredible like box sets that they released with the figure, you know, the Gollum figurine and the Minas Tirith, and the 10 hours worth of extra features. That to me is like the height of extra features, which has never been surpassed.
Yeah, that's
never been surpassed.
That's the benchmark to me. At least,
benchmark.
That's the benchmark in terms of special features, is to be that extensive, to have that many hours.
There you go. And Peter Jackson's another example, isn't he, of a filmmaker who, he was immediately putting out those cuts. There wasn't a kind of 10-year period where he was saying, I'm going to go back to it, other than the 4K remasters. But in terms of like, he knew there was going to be a cut of that anyway, and that's what he was working on. And it became a thing where it was the theatrical, and then a year later, the extended edition was released. And there was this kind of, 3-year period of that happening. And just phenomenal. But, again, you could kind of look at that, it's like the auteur theory of, the filmmakers, the author, and their vision is absolute paramount. So what, we're the audience. We're not, I don't think we're people who should be, we don't own that movie. We appreciate it and we're a huge part of its success. But at the end of the day, I guess, if the filmmaker wants to play about with it, let them play about with it.
I was literally
sometimes they can just ruin it.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, which cut of Blade Runner do you prefer? Because we were just talking, Ridley Scott has gone back and cut several of his movies, and I remember the first time I bought Blade Runner on DVD, it came with 5 cuts, and the Blu-ray, the first Blu-ray around, came with 5 cuts of the movie as well.
Yeah.
But I think they only put the final cut in the 4K edition that came out. So you just said you didn't like director's cuts. I'm just curious what you thought about Scott going back and doing all that.
Obviously, I think about Blade Runner a lot. It's one of my favorites. One of my holy trinity. Jaws, Blade Runner, The Thing. They're the 3. If anybody asks me what my favorite movies, and if somebody put a gun to my head, Jaws is my favorite film of all time. The greatest movie ever made, untouchable. Blade Runner, I kind of try and measure it as by being sort of subjective about it. If I was to choose between The Thing and Blade Runner from 1982, I would have to go for The Thing, because I don't quite like the cut as much of the original theatrical. It's still an amazing movie. I still enjoy it, but I would probably say the final cut. The final cut is just the icing on the cake, and it's, to me, the definitive version of it, where he's just kind of tweaked it enough. He's not picked at the scab too much. He's kind of gone in. He's gone and sort of taken the original actress. He got Harrison Ford's son just to do like a mouth scene, and then amazing, really, just the detail.
Yeah, takes out the narration. Which I guess people really didn't like to begin with.
But in terms of director's cut, it's probably the only director's cut off the top of my head which I love. I love the director's cut, because the director's cut for me is the moment that I really did understand that film. I remember as a kid, I say a kid, I was probably about 12, 13, Harrison Ford to me, is my hero. He's like, he was my actor in the 80s, that most people's actors, to be honest, of my generation. And to watch him in something like Blade Runner and be so used to him as Han Solo or Indiana Jones was so jarring. I just wasn't ready for it. I was too young. I didn't understand it. And it wasn't until I got to university and I was, you know, sort of studying cyberpunk and you know, utopia, dystopia, and really digging really into pretty much where I started in terms of really wanting to go into film journalism really and write about it. I mean, when I was doing my dissertations, that's when I really kind of appreciated the film. And that's why I love Blade Runner, because I've gone from not particularly liking it to being one of my favorite films of all time. And I think that can be said for a lot of people who've probably had that experience with the film, that they're not necessarily loved it straight away. That there's always something with that movie that when you watch it, you'll always see another layer, another detail. And I will always stand by Blade Runner as I do understand when people say, well, it's not a brilliant story, there's not really much plot. It's like, you know, come on. It's like it's a great movie. And whether you think that the story isn't very good or not, you cannot argue that that is one of the most influential movies ever made. You know, you can do a lecture just on the architecture of that movie, the fashion of that movie, the graphic design of that movie, the cinematography, the philosophy, the psychology. It has everything in that movie. So anybody that I'm sorry, you just wouldn't be able to argue about it. We wouldn't, because there's
I don't disagree with you. It's in my top like 5 favorite movies of all time. I bring it up all the time myself.
Now let's break. Now we do. So I do. Before we wrap it up, we do need to get back around to your physical media contributing work. You know, so yeah, as we've said before, you've done a lot of. You know, you did stuff for Arrow, Eureka, things like that. So when did you first get into kind of connecting? Like, what was your first connection with a label and doing? You know, I think most of your work has been written essay stuff, right?
Yeah. Second Sight is the first.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
And so most of what was coming out was kind of one Second Sight release after the next. And I've had a bit of a hiatus from that because that's the lay of the land with physical media. You know, there's a lot of other writers out there, and in the way it's divvied out. And to be honest, you know, I can understand that if you're a label, you don't want the same writer on every single release. You know, certain writers that I will see on a label, and I'll be like, oh, God's sake, that person again. It's like, can we get someone else? There's loads of other writers out there. There's so much talent out there. I know because I've got some students, even when they've been 18, they're writing stuff. I'm thinking, this is amazing. You know, I would publish that. So yeah, I wouldn't even want myself on. It shouldn't be like that. So it was Second Sight. Then I think it could have been a Eureka. I think I did some Eureka stuff, and then Eureka sometimes they'll have licenses for a lot of stuff. As you've noticed, they're putting a lot of Hong Kong work out there. So they had a lot of licenses. They were coming to an end. So that's why they've gone for a massive surge of Hong Kong cinema and martial arts movies. So I was kind of doing stuff that was then it was done and it was completed, and then it probably went a year and then they were suddenly released. 101 was around the same time. So I mean, the Johnny Mnemonic piece. So there's been commentaries I've done, but they haven't been released because they were shelved to do with certain films. But they will see a release. Yeah, Johnny Mnemonic was an interesting one. It's an interesting movie. Is it a great movie? No. It's not a great movie, but it's an interesting. It's a really interesting.
Talk about a movie that was influenced by Blade Runner.
Yeah, of course, yeah. I mean, and that was the great thing to do. I absolutely snapped up Johnny Mnemonic. So I thought wonderful, because that goes back to my dissertation roots. It goes back to my love of Blade Runner. You know, Philip K. Dick, William Gibson, but it also connected to what I lecture in terms of art and design history, and looking at the director himself and his background in art, and there's amazing work, incredible work that he produces. I mean, it's the only movie he's ever directed. You can understand why when you listen to the commentary and do your research. Anyway, there's loads of stuff out there. but yeah, phenomenal, really. And I guess when you find that, unfortunately, the black and white version is not on the release, but if you get to see the black and white version of Johnny Mnemonic, it makes more sense as to how it would have been, how it would have worked, and how that film should have been made without studio interference, really. So yeah, that's they're the sort of labels that I kind of went from. It started with Second Sight, and it's continued with Second Sight. I'll have another one, at least another one out with them this year. I just completed a piece for a 4K release, so yeah, that should be really good. I seem to get, it's really interesting with Second Sight because they seem to give me everything that is ghost related. So anything to do with ghosts, which I absolutely love. I love ghosts. So it's just something that I've, again, fallen into. But I sort of look back and think, actually, no, that's always been a part of, even sort of growing up. We all love a good ghost story, don't we?
Yeah. Is there any particular? I know you've said some of your favorite films. Is there any particular movie, maybe that ain't one of them favorite films that you've mentioned, that you would love to do some kind of features work on, whether commentary or essay? Nightcrawler.
Yeah. Nightcrawler for me is one of the best movies so far this century. And I think if there was a reissue of Nightcrawler, then
that would be good. Yeah.
It's absolutely top of my list. I would absolutely adore writing for that. And
we talk about cinematic experiences. I still remember the day, because I went and saw that in theaters, and I still remember seeing that movie in theaters, and it was like only me and like 2 other people in the theater, and like just remembering how I felt after that movie, thinking, God damn, that's such a crazy movie.
It is, and also it is going back to what we're saying about now cinema and modern movies. That to me is like, again, it's benchmark. Yeah, and I mean, Gyllenhaal can't do any wrong. Denis Villeneuve. Look at something like Prisoners, which is another incredible thriller, one of the best thrillers. Period. There is some amazing movies now, but you really do have to curate what you're watching, and I think that's what it comes back to again, doesn't it? Is the curation aspect of, films are less curated, I think, in terms of, if you look at bad streaming services, Shudder is amazing for it. I think Shudder's fantastic. That's the model. And the sad thing is, with what's happened with Shudder recently, that really depresses me. I think, Jesus, of all the streaming services that are getting this right and doing the Lord's work, and really supporting a what is already a community that has always been on the flipping outskirts. Horror films. Oh, of course they're not cinema, are they? Horror movies, of course they're not. But that really annoys me. Things like that. Most people in the horror community, absolutely. It should be about. Again, it comes back to the storytelling, doesn't it? But Nightcrawler, definitely, absolutely top of, if it ever got released, if I ever snagged that one, I'd be a happy bunny.
Yeah, anybody that listens to this show that works at one of the labels, if just to put it out there for Rich, if you guys are thinking about putting out that movie, contact Rich. He'd be really passionate about that.
Ironically, I think it's we're getting close to a 10-year anniversary as time has gone on. It's like 2014, so next year is the 10-year anniversary. That's the funny thing about time.
I mean, it's interesting because how quick a decade goes by, and all these films. But I mean, going back to Second Sight, I mean, obviously, I worked with Phil briefly on one of the releases, and I mean, obviously, you've had him on the show with Sarah as well. They know their onions. They're just very good at what they do. And again, if you want 2 people, and Phil in particular has been in the game a long time, and there's a hell of a lot of credentials there in terms of not just what he's been producing for the labels, but his own films. And it's great to see that he works for Second Sight full time now. So a lot of the time I've tended to work with Chris, and now obviously Phil takes over on certain productions, and he tends to be handling that. So which is great, because we've kind of, when we were working on the commentary for this particular film that was shelved, that was an amazing experience, just to see what he'd done with it and how he was, you know, when I did the commentary, I had like a script and I was breaking down all the different time cues of when the volume should go and kick in when I was referring to something, and it was so tight, and it was so well done. So I'm looking forward to when it eventually gets released. But the book that started all this, when I wrote it, is unfortunate, because I wrote that in about, I think I spent about 5 months solidly working on it, and this publisher picked it up and basically sat on it for 3 years.
Whew.
Really, really disrespectful. And I fortunately just recently had the contract broke and got that book back. So fingers crossed, I'm hoping that it will get published. And to be honest, First Port of Call was the label that shelved that particular film that the book was written on anyway. It might get put into the box set anyway, so we'll see what happens.
Well, that's exciting, man. So yeah, whenever that happens, let's have you back on to talk about that particular release.
Anytime.
And yeah. So Rich, this has been a great conversation, man. We can tell he's a good talker. He's obviously a lecturer. He's good at talking.
You kind of have to be if you're going to stand up and talk. You gotta be able to.
But yeah, this has been great, man. I loved the discussion of just what movies mean to us, and our place in our lives, and how important it is to look at films in a certain way. And so great stuff. But Rich, if anybody ever wants to contact you for work or just to talk about movies, what's a good place for that?
Well, yeah, my website, if you go to richpieces.com, I'm usually on Twitter. I'm not a massive social media person. I just kind of sort of hang around a little bit, post the odd little things, share things. That's at Rich Pieces. So yeah, you can get me there. Yeah, drop me a line.
Well, Rich, thank you for joining us, and we hope you're having a good rest of your day.
No problem. Pleasure. Have a good one, folks.
Bye.
See you soon.